Welcome, class, to the Week 7 presentation for ME105 Medical Terminology. This week, as usual, we do have two chapters to focus on. They are kind of heavy hitters. Chapter 14 is the nervous system, and Chapter 15, the endocrine system. Oftentimes, I've found that students don't have a working knowledge of the endocrine system, so that might be one you want to study a little more in depth than you normally do. And the nervous system is a heavy hitter just because it's more complex than some of our other systems. Let's dive right in. So looking at the structural organization, the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of all the other nerves which are located all over the body. So both of those make up our nervous system as a whole. The peripheral nervous system can be subdivided into the sensory and motor divisions. Let's talk about the functions of our nervous system. Some pretty important functions. There's 5 general main functions. Sensory input is the first one. The nervous system regulates sensory input to the brain. It comes from receptors all over the body at both the conscious and subconscious levels. Internal homeostatic stimuli are being processed continually at a subconscious level. The second function is motor output. So motor output from the brain stimulates the skeletal muscles to contract and enables a person to walk in any way. The production of sweat, saliva, and digestive enzymes is controlled without active input from you. The third function is evaluation and integration. This occurs in the brain and the spinal cord to process the sensory input, initiate a response, and store the event in memory. The fourth function is homeostasis. It's maintained by the nervous system taking in internal sensory input and also responding to it. And the last main function of the nervous system is mental activity. This occurs in the brain so that a person can think, feel, understand, respond, as well as remember. Some pretty important things. Next, we'll focus first on the brain. So the brain can be divided into 3 main portions. The cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain, and it consists of 2 halves or hemispheres. It controls memory, problem solving, and language. The lobes of the cerebrum are the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. The cerebellum is the smaller portion of the brain that lies inferior to the cerebrum. It coordinates skeletal muscle activity to maintain posture and balance. The brainstem is an elongated portion of the brain that lies inferior to the cerebrum and anterior to the cerebellum. The brainstem is what connects the brain and the spinal cord. One portion that's pictured on here in the cross section that I want you to remember is the thalamus. The thalamus, that term actually means inner room. It is actually a mass of gray matter under the ventricle of the central hemisphere. Under the ventricle in each central hemisphere. It relays incoming sensory information. So I want you to equate the thalamus with the relaying of incoming sensory information. A couple of words I want you to be familiar with and how to break these down. Neurectomy. So if we break it into neuro and ectomy, neuro is going to indicate nerve. Ectomy is going to indicate surgical removal. So neurectomy is a surgical removal of a nerve. Monoplaglia, that suffix plaglia is going to indicate paralysis. Mono is going to indicate a number, which is 1. So we have paralysis of one limb. Monoplaglia. One diagnostic procedure I want you to be familiar with, a myelogram. A myelogram, the term, if we break it down, means a record of the spinal cord. So what happens is a lumbar puncture is performed to insert a needle into the subdural space, And what happens then is they inject contrast that shows up on x-ray, and they will move the patient after the contrast has been injected in certain positions, and they'll watch how that flows through and around the spinal cord, and they'll look for impingements or areas where the flow is not good, meaning that something is pushing or pressing on the spinal cord. One condition to be aware of, and that's coma. A lot of times people often think the word is a coma, but it's actually two words. If a patient is in a coma, it's two words. The condition is called coma. So coma is a profound state of unconsciousness associated with an illness or injury. And actually, I lied to you. There's a couple more conditions beyond that one on the next slide, so let's look at those. Multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and Lou Gehrig disease. Let's talk about each of these. So multiple sclerosis. This is due to a lack of myelin insulation around a nerve. Parkinson's disease, what I want you to focus on are some characteristic symptoms and signs. Fine tremors, muscle rigidity, and a shuffling gait, meaning when the patient walks, they really shuffle their feet. Lou Gehrig disease, it's often called that, but the more technical name is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. This is due to a degeneration of motor neurons of the spinal cord itself. So those three conditions in addition to coma, those will be helpful for your quiz. We are going to next move on to the endocrine system. Let's first look at the structures of the endocrine system. So, in addition to the major structures of the endocrine system, there are also endocrine cells found throughout all the tissues of the body. Endocrine cells and organs secrete hormones. They generally secrete their hormones into the bloodstream. Hormones affect target cells that they have receptors for them. The first organ that is on here, and it's located in our head, is the hypothalamus. It produces 8 hormones. 6 of them are local hormones that regulate the production of hormones by the anterior pituitary gland, which we'll talk about the pituitary next. 2 of them, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, these are transported to the posterior pituitary, where they are stored until they are needed elsewhere in the body. Next, let's focus on that pituitary. This one tends to be the most complicated. It is referred to as the master gland because it does affect a lot of things. So bear with me. This one's going to be the worst. The rest won't be nearly as complex. I do recommend, if you're trying to study hormones and what gland it's coming from and what the hormone's responsible for, note cards are really good for that. So the pituitary gland has 2 components, a large anterior lobe and a smaller posterior lobe. Let's look at the anterior lobe hormones first. Follicle-stimulating hormone, this stimulates the ovaries to produce ova and stimulates the testes to produce spermatozoa. Luteinizing hormone, this stimulates ovulation in females and stimulates the testes to produce testosterone. Thyroid-stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to produce thyroxine. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, often abbreviated ACTH, stimulates the adrenal glands to produce corticosteroids, and we'll talk more about the adrenal glands later. Prolactin stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk, and growth hormone stimulates cells to increase in number as well as size. Next, let's focus on the posterior lobe hormones. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions as well as lactation. Antidiuretic hormone regulates the urine production of the kidneys, so it basically regulates the volume of water in the body. That's antidiuretic hormone. Next, we'll move and talk about the pineal gland. This is located in our brain. The pineal gland secretes serotonin by day and converts it to melatonin at night. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter in both the central and peripheral nervous systems. Melatonin is involved in maintaining circadian rhythms, that sleep-wake cycle. The pineal gland reaches its maximum size in childhood and may regulate the timing of puberty. Next, we're going to talk about the thyroid, parathyroid, as well as the thymus. So the thyroid gland lies just beneath the skin of the neck below the thyroid cartilage. It is about 2 inches across. It's shaped kind of similar to a bow tie. The cells in this gland secrete 2 thyroid hormones known as T3 and T4. The thyroid also produces the hormone calcitonin, which promotes calcium deposits and bone formation. The parathyroid glands are located on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. They are rice-sized, and there are 4 of them. So there are 4 parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone, that should be an easy one to remember, which raises blood calcium levels by stimulating bone reabsorption. The thymus secretes the hormone thymosin. Again, another one that kind of makes sense if you think about it. Next, we're going to move on to the pancreas. All right, the pancreas is located in the abdominal cavity near the duodenum, which is again that first part of the small intestines. Most of the pancreas is an exocrine gland that secretes digestive juices through a duct. Scattered throughout the pancreas, though, are clusters of endocrine cells grouped around blood vessels. So it has a dual purpose. It's exocrine and endocrine. The endocrine cells secrete glucagon, insulin, and somatostatin. Glucagon actually raises blood glucose, and then insulin lowers it. Moving on to our adrenal glands next. So the adrenal glands sit right on top of our kidneys like little hats. They are thought of as 2 glands, the outer portion known as the adrenal cortex and the inner portion known as the adrenal medulla. Looking at the adrenal cortex first, it produces and secretes corticosteroids, which are glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and sex steroids. The adrenal medulla produces acetylcholine, which are responsible for the body's fight or flight response. Cortisone is a hormone that is made by the adrenal glands, and it's responsible for the regulation of body metabolism. Some interesting things to remember for your quiz. Feminization may develop in a male due to problems with the adrenal gland. There's one condition I want you to be aware of, Cushing syndrome. It's caused by a hypersecretion, which is an oversecretion, of the adrenal cortex. Again, that's Cushing syndrome. One abbreviation in terms of this chapter to remember, RIA. It's radioimmunoassay. This is the abbreviation for a diagnostic lab test that's used to measure levels of hormones that are found in the plasma of blood. A couple of words to be aware of. Thyroiditis. If we break that term apart, this one should be an easy one at this point. Thyroid and itis. Itis is going to indicate inflammation. Thyroid obviously is going to be referring to the thyroid gland. So we have an inflammation of the thyroid gland. Endocrinologist. This is the doctor who studies the endocrine system. A disorder to be aware of, and I think it's just one for this particular chapter. Hopefully I'm not lying to you again. Nope, it is just one. Diabetes insipidus. This is a disorder associated with the deficiency of antidiuretic hormone or the inability of the kidneys to respond to antidiuretic hormone. So some symptoms include polydipsia and polyuria. Again, that is diabetes insipidus. We are in the 7th week, and I will tell you, 7th week can be hard. You're past the midway point. You're really wanting to be done, but you're not there yet. So take a moment to stretch. Give yourself a brain break sometime throughout the week. But remember, we still have many more points to be had, so you can't stop now. You can't stop 3/4 of the way up the staircase and think that you've reached your goal. So stay strong and push through. I promise the next few weeks will go quickly if you dedicate yourself, and then you'll have that sense of accomplishment. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. You guys should know my email address by heart at this point, I would think. Everything from this week's presentation did come from your textbook, so always use that as your reference and resource guide. Thank you so much and have a great week.